I am Frederick Boyle. I am a retired United Methodist pastor. I retired maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I didn't keep track, but um, much to my surprise, actually, I got an email from Lois to invite me to be here this evening and to share experiences that I had 20 years ago in going to Iraq just previous to W's uh, shock and awe excursion. Um, I had signed up to I had heard about the Human Shield program that was going on at that time, and without knowing really too much about anything, I definitely felt a calling to oppose what I saw was being proposed to inflict on the Iraqi people. And so I was motivated to contact Human Shields and volunteer to go. And I guess because I was a clergy, the local media in Morristown, New Jersey, picked it up, and all of a sudden I found myself, you know, in the center of something that I never anticipated. I expected to just go and be part of that program. I had gone to, I think I heard about the Human Shields because I had gone down to Washington, D.C. and other places to demonstrate, opposing the proposed shock and awe program. But suddenly I found myself in the midst of something that I never anticipated. All the media, pro and con, to be opposing the war. Um, but I followed up on it and found myself on a plane to Jordan because at that time you could not fly into directly into Baghdad. But so you had to fly into Jordan and meet up with the folks there. And so I did that, and when I arrived in Jordan and got delivered to a hotel um, that was in a tiny little place, run down hotel. Water was running through the street, and they had to kind of jump over the puddles to from the cab to get into the hotel. And went up, got into the hotel, got into a dingy room. I pretty quickly discovered that the Human Shields was not organized at all. They were very disorganized. It was being run um, uh, from my first reckoning as by a couple of people who really didn't know, appeared to me to not know a great deal about what they were doing. And the more I learned about it, I began having feelings like I'm not sure that this is such a good idea to be going into potentially a war zone, like under the auspice of people who don't really know, didn't appear to me like they really didn't know what they were doing. And also, I learned that the people who would be going into Iraq with that program were going to be under the authority of the Iraqi government. They would be, the Human Shields would be housed and fed and moved around by the Iraqi government, which is not something that I really wanted to subject myself to. Um, and I was aware of another organization called a Christian Peacemaker Team. Some of you may be aware of the CPT. If you don't mind, I'll just refer to it as CPT, Christian Peacemaker Team. Um, I had heard that they were just about to send a delegation into Baghdad, and that delegation was going to be arriving in Amman, Jordan, within the next day or so. And I was more familiar and more confident of CPT, and so just on the off chance, I contacted in Chicago the office of CPT to find out if it would be possible to connect up with the delegation that was going to be going from Amman into Baghdad. It was going to be a tight, they were going to be, like basically an overnight coming, the team was gathering in Amman, and then the next morning they were going to be going into Baghdad, which left very um, a small amount of time to make that connection. But as God would have it, um, I hope you'll excuse me. I am a Christian Quaker, and so I use Christian terminology. As a Christian Quaker, I also, I am totally comfortable with Muslim and Jewish and whatever, But my own background is Christian, and as I said, I'm a retired United Methodist pastor, so that's my jargon, and I hope you'll um, I hope you'll go along with that explanation. Anyway, as God would have it, um, it snowed that night that the delegation was going to come into Amman, Jordan. It snowed in Amman, Jordan, and they hadn't had snow in Amman, Jordan in heaven knows how long. But having the snow come in gave me an opportunity to go down to the embassy, the U.S. embassy, and arrange to have my visa be part of the CPT delegation. So I was able to, by God's grace, I was able to connect up with the CPT delegation and went into Baghdad with that organization. Also, the CPT had, because they had delegations going into Baghdad before this particular one. And so they had a whole program of contacts in Baghdad. And so we visited hospitals, we visited the World Health Organization in Baghdad. We visited homes of residents. We visited a Christian church. We've visited temple, excuse me, drawing a blank, a Muslim temple. And we traveled around. We went up to Nineveh. We went to Mosul, um, because CPT had uh, um, established all these connections, and the Iraqi government was aware that CPT had absolutely no. I mean, one of the things about CPT is that they do not really take a political side. They stand between. That's the rule. I remember one fellow named Grant, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his last name right off the top of my head, but I believe he was a Lutheran pastor, and we were at one of our morning meetings in Baghdad, and I'll never forget one of the things that he said. It says, "Don't just do something, stand there." And that, as a peace activist, I always have thought that that was a very good position to take. Because as soon as you start leaning one direction or another, then you're going to get a pushback. But if you're just sort of like standing and representing, that what we can hear both sides. That was a very good position to take. And I think one of the other things, one of the things that I had hoped to accomplish by going into Baghdad at that particular time was to give a human reading of the Iraqi people, that the Iraqi people are not our enemies. And one of the things that really struck me and that I have recounted on several occasions in my sermons when talking about peace, um, it was coming up toward the end. I think I was in Baghdad 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that, something on that order. But it was one of the things that struck me toward the end of that journey in Baghdad itself was I'd gone down. I was going to be flying or traveling out of Baghdad. You couldn't fly out of Baghdad. You had to go back into Jordan in order to get an airplane. But anyway, I went down to a place where they said that I could check on my travel arrangements and have them look at my visa, et cetera, so that I could safely get out of the country. And I walked into this room, and there was a table set there, and there was probably three or four women who were sitting there, to look at my papers, et cetera, et cetera. And they asked to see my passport. Of course, I gave it to them, and they said, looked at it, U.S. passport. They said, you're our enemy. Would you like a cup of tea? And I mean, that just, I mean, that was just so beautiful, I mean, that I think that just spoke to me that they're no different, really. The Iraqi people, the Israelis, the Palestinians. They they want to raise their families. They want to keep their children safe. Um, so it just spoke volumes and volumes to me about the whatever the government is doing, that people all over the world are just like us. Um, anyway, so coming back, like during the time that I was in Iraq, I had contact. There was the local paper in Morristown, the Daily Record, was like they're the ones that plastered my name all over everything. Much, I mean, it is what it was. Um, and they were so while I was in Iraq, I was hearing, because I periodically the newspaper would contact me in Baghdad, and they would say, not everybody is in favor of what you're doing there, And to be honest, I had never really given that a thought. It just never occurred to me, I mean, I was just, I was their Christian peacemaker team, what's the problem? Um, but it was a problem for a number of people. And when I got when I returned, um, and actually was able to, I heard, my email, my texts, my phone messages. I mean, it reminds me of what is happening now with I don't even can't even say his name, but I think you know who I'm talking about. That is turning attention, all this negative attention, on innocent people. There's just people trying to do their job and whatnot. But the deluge that comes because of media was astounding. And I was serving a church at that time, and even people in the church, that people that I had a wonderful, wonderful relationship with, suddenly, like had an entirely different view uh, uh, stories were being made up, that I mean, why? What is this about? People are accusing me of child abuse, people accusing me of being a criminal. I mean, just like all kinds of just stuff that I never even would have imagined. And that's why when I'm hearing about people who are being targeted by a certain Republican, I kind of know what they're talking about because I mean, ordinarily, you wouldn't imagine that people would do that to somebody, but they do. And so, I mean, when I'm hearing on the news about, the people who are receiving death threats and all manner of negativity, and I don't even want to really imagine the stuff because the media now is much more than it was 20 years ago. Um, and so I was surprised by that, and this is where I sort of like begin really having to consider the struggle, the struggle to be um, a voice that is not in the mainstream. Particularly when it comes to people's view of patriotism, what is patriotic and what is not. Um, and entering into the political uh, arena. I mean, I was so naive that I didn't think that I didn't really consider that war was a political issue. But obviously it is. But that hadn't been on my mind. I was incredibly naive about the whole business, when I first started out. Because then it went from that, and then the government got involved in coming after me. The OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset something or another, the government came after me and it said that because I had gone into Iraq, there was supposedly a law that I didn't know anything about that said, you can't be spending U.S. money in Iraq at that time because somehow it was going to be supporting the Iraqi government and therefore making me an enemy of the United States. I mean, the amount of money, the amount of money I spent in Iraq. I mean, I probably eat more than that in a week. I mean, but and particularly in light of the fact that the government was still, and the big oil and all the corporations, they were still pouring billions of dollars, probably, I'm not familiar with statistics, but I'm sure they were spending a lot more money in Iraq in those days than I spent in a restaurant, or paying for a hotel room. But because it was all wrapped up in because I was opposed to what W wanted, I now was an enemy of the United States, according to the U.S. government, which then they were going to. I was threatened with prison and enormous fines, for having made this trek into Iraq with a Christian peacemaker team, and so the I contacted the ACLU. The ACL or the ACLU contacted me. I don't remember exactly how that transpired, but one way or another, the ACLU jumped in, and then there was another group. It began with a B, and I'm sorry, I can't recall the name of it right off the top of my head. Anyway, there was another set of lawyers that got involved to my defense. I mean, it was a struggle of activism that I had never anticipated, and uh, eventually, I mean, because I mean, my greatest calling was to be a pastor of a church. I mean, that's really what I feel God called me to, and it's what I actually had gone through all of the steps in order to get ordained, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really what I wanted to do. And I found that the only way that I was going to be able to continue to do that after a 2 or 3 year struggle with the government and all was to just settle. I settled for I can't remember the dollar amount now, but the ACLU or this other organization, we came to terms, so that I would get out of the news, just go back to my simple life, and the government would go on with what it is doing. So, I mean, um, that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. And I guess I'm wondering if I'd like to just kind of hear questions, feedback, your own experiences. Um, and I think, like I said, when we were just sort of Susan, Lois, and I were talking just a little bit before other folks came online about what do we do now? I mean, to what level are we ready to put ourselves on the firing line in the current situation? Um, Oh, one other thing that I did want to mention during the time that I was being chased after by the federal government, and there were still newspapers. The church that I had been serving, I was no longer tenable, and the bishop had to move me to another church, which the other church was down in the Trenton area in a little small town called Titusville, which was actually just across the river from Pennsylvania at Washington Crossing. Um, and I was down there, and while trying to um, get on with my life, but it was also still in the news, and I had heard that about the mistreatment of prisoners in Abu Ghraib. And so I went on a fasting. I went on a very extended fast to try to draw attention to the abuse of prisoners in Abu Ghraib, which of course kept me a little bit more in the news. But at that time, um, there was a group of Quakers that came over and I can't remember the town that's directly across from Titusville in that area. It's just south of New Hope. But there was a group of Quakers that came over one evening. I had been invited to speak at an occasion. I don't remember exactly what it was. And there was a group of Quakers who came over from Pennsylvania to attend the talk that I was giving that evening. Um, and it really, I mean, I had heard of the Friends, of course, but I never really paid a lot of I never really paid a lot of attention to what they were doing. But that was the first time that I recognized, what the Quakers were about in terms of their peace and their stance of, I mean, in some ways, those Quakers coming over from Pennsylvania made me aware that in some ways the Quakers live what that fellow Grant had talked about when we were in Baghdad. Don't just do something, stand there. Allow stillness to work. Allow what I call God, whatever other names are presented. I can't read it. What does it say? What does it say, Susanna?
It's in Portuguese, but it says, "Be still and know that I am God," and that's
Amen.
that's that's basically what that's like. That's it. That's our motto. And I have a number of mugs that it reminds me all the time. Yes, be still and know that I am God. It's just beautiful. I'm a
Right.
Christian too. And
Yeah, from the Psalms, and and I think that in now 20 years later, and having learned a thing or two, and really we're sitting more often with Quakers. I attend the Montclair monthly meeting when I can. I still get called out to preach as a retired pastor, but whenever I can, I mean, to be able to spend that hour to find really the the power of silence and allow God to be God, and I think as I said, I'm going to be 75 fairly soon, and I just feel like for me right now, peace activism, um, I have to count on God for it. I mean, in our own little sphere, right? Each of us, I have my little sphere, and I play the harp, and bring as much peace into the world as possible. Because I mean, it's hard. I mean, to be really out there on the front line um, is tough.
what can you go back like the 90s, the 80s? What led you to this? I mean, I I just remember that the first Iraq war was just horrific. And then in 2001, suddenly deciding that after 9/11 we were going to go and bomb Iraq. I mean, it was just so disgusting. And then they had a vote in Congress, and there was one person, there was only one senator who was opposed to it. Barbara Boxer, was that who it was? Yeah.
Mm.
But all of them, and there were all these stories about weapons of mass destruction, and it was all a lie. And that whole thing, it's interesting because we've just gone through 7 years of this awful behavior in Congress and everything else. But and I think we've forgotten how appalling the behavior was in the early 2000s with these. And so can you then describe what led you up to that? Because I think it's personally, I didn't know you'd done that, and I'm so thrilled you did. I think I know it was hard and it took a huge toll on you, but I'm really glad you did that.
I was just one of many people, I mean, I didn't look at it as anything extraordinary at the time, and I still don't. I mean, I'm in some ways, like I was mentioning to my wife, this evening as we were having dinner. In some ways, I feel a little bit dishonest because this, for whatever reason, and I really cannot explain why, that particular invasion just rattled me, and got me out of this very quiet space of going to seminary and just wanting to pastor a small church in New Jersey and sort of live my life. Why? I can only say that it was that it was the Holy Spirit somehow just awakened that part of me. My family, I mean, going all the way back to my great grandparents, were all pacifists. And my great grandmother from forward were of the Baha'i faith, which encompasses pretty much a view of all faiths. Um, but pacifist, I have that deeply rooted in my gen, genealogy, and the what W was proposing at that time, based on very flimsy evidence. I mean, I never did believe that there was WMD, but that was just, it was just an intuitive sense. I had absolutely no data empirical data to support my intuitive sense, but that was my intuitive sense that the whole thing was bogus. Um, and especially like on top of, as you say, Susanna, the 91, which that wasn't a war, that was a massacre. There was, they went in there and just mowed down the people. That's all there was to it. And I mean, and to do that again in 10 years. I mean, one of the places that we visited in the while in Baghdad was a hospital that had been bombed by American missiles in 91. And the bomb had come down through basically a chimney shaft, and just boom, blew everybody away. And so I mean, I don't. I wish I had I wish I had a real causal thing to share. Why in 2001, or 2003, why was I moved to put myself out that far? I really can't say, except by divine impulse.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, those of us who, for whatever reason, aren't in a position to travel to any of the war zones right now in the world, what do you think we could do here?
I think I think Susanna's cup speaks volumes. I mean that when we have our time of silence, that we hold that and lift that, to God and let God be God. Because I don't have the wherewithal to travel back to, um, I mean, Iran or Palestine. I just don't have the wherewithal to do it now, and so I have to trust that in fact God is if that our belief in the power of silence, our unity in purpose of peace. I have to believe that can be enough and that it's needed, essentially, powerfully needed. But, Tom, is it? I think you.
Yes, that's right. What did CPT do when it got to Baghdad and other cities? What was its activity once there?
I can only speak to what they did in Baghdad.
Yeah,
Um, right. We as I said, we visited hospitals. We realized, like what was going on there, the conditions, and we visited the World Health Organization. So we gained education, of from the Iraqi perspective, um, and let them know, that not all Americans were war advocates, that the war machine, if you will, of the U.S. government does not represent the American people as a whole. That we were just as appalled, but just as powerless.
yeah,
I mean, that you know. That we, if the Iraqi people were to come into our homes, we would offer them tea. And I remember we presented a couple of um, demonstrations, so to speak, where we would, showed solidarity with the Iraqi people. Not necessarily, again, because it wasn't a political position. It's just go there and stand there, and stand there with the Iraqi people to stand there with the Native Americans, if that's, CPT has a presence in the Native American struggle here in this country, to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, the Israelis. I mean, not taking a position, but saying, you know what, we're just people, and there's people over there and there's people over there, and we're all the same,
So,
and so
so
for
you
whatever that can represent.
so you were there as peacemakers.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, I mean, to be able to say, to listen to both sides. I mean, because conflict happens when one side isn't listening to the other, and both sides are listening to neither. That's what creates conflict. But if both sides could actually hear the other side, um, there's a better opportunity for reconciliation, or for peace. So CPT, I hesitate to speak for CPT, because I'm only giving it from my limited perspective, but was that it doesn't take a side. It just goes and stands between. It says, "We hear you, we hear you. Do you hear each other?" And normally they don't. And that's what's going on now. I mean, Hamas, it was horrible what they did, but is it any more horrible than what's occurring today?
Mm.
And of course, that conflict goes way, way back. I gave a sermon recently, asking the question, how do we get to ground zero? How do we go back to zero? Because I mean, this conflict has gone for eons. This goes way back to Ishmael and Isaac. I mean, it's just, I mean, way, way back. Well, you did this. Yeah, well, you did that. Well, you did this. Well, you did that. And dot, 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 dot. How do you get back to zero? And say, let's start from this point. We both have done things that maybe were, not maybe, but were regrettable, that were inhuman, and that was, it was selfish. It was, I mean, whatever word we put on there was death to the other side. And it's happened for eons from both sides. Is it even possible without God's intervention to go back to zero? How do you get back to zero? I don't know if we can.
I'm wondering if a lot of the problem is that the politicians are not listening to their own intelligence. I mean, I just it's it. My head is pretty much exploding over what's going on in Israel and Palestine at the moment, because it's just so awful. And I was talking to a weighty friend on Friday about this, and she said, well, all you can do is just focus on the Quaker organizations that are in Israel and in Palestine. And I just thought that's what we need to do. And actually, we've been trying to do that. We've been trying to contact Ramallah Friends School for some time. Lois and Craig, and mainly Lois, has been doing a great job there. Maybe I've made a contact today. I don't know. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, if we can help the people who we know are there and are there to help, which is Ramallah School. And then we heard today that those 3 young men that were shot, they were all Ramallah School graduates, which just...
Oh, really?
Yes. And so one of them is in Haverford. And so they all went to universities around the United States. So this is, it just puts another layer of awfulness onto it, though. But that's what we can do. We have to focus on what we have. And the American Foreign Service Committee was started in 1917, and they're good people, and they are they've been in Palestine, they've been in Israel for a long time. I went to a meeting they had about 4 years ago, where they brought people from Palestine and from Israel into Philadelphia, and they traveled around the United States. So I think we have the resources. We just have to put things together. And that's tough but that's what we have to do. And that's what I have to do. Try and figure out how we can get things together. But having you talk to us is really part of it, though. And then next week we're going to have the principal of Brahmana School talk to us, and hopefully we'll also get some people from Ramallah to talk to us, so that we can figure out what to focus on and what we can do collectively. Because
the link that I connected here, is this an ongoing link? I would use the same link next week, for instance.
Yes, you would. Yes, except next week it'll be at 2:00 in the afternoon, because he's in Lebanon. He's speaking from Lebanon, which is really great. Yeah, I mean, Lebanon, he doesn't have the same problems they're having in Palestine. But, the Lebanese currency collapsed some years ago. So, I mean, it's an uphill struggle, and he's doing a terrific job of keeping the school together. So, we can't stop the bombs, but maybe, I don't know, maybe if we all hold the negotiators in the light and really put enormous energy, maybe we really can stop continue the ceasefire. It's gone on for 4 days, and I read today that Biden is hoping that it will continue after 4 days, which I thought was interesting. I mean, excellent, but that's I
mean, I was thinking about, I'm moderately active on Facebook, and once in a while, I'll post something with a political slant to it. And I posted something the other day to the effect that, and I was recounting the movie Apocalypse Now. And probably many of you remember that movie from the 70s, Apocalypse Now. And this guy goes all the way up the river, and he gets to the end of the river, and there's Marlon Brando there. And one of the things that I recalled, a point that he made, is that war is by definition immoral, and that the power that is willing to be the most immoral is going to win the war. And I posted that up on Facebook, that view. Which of course elicited pushback, and so then I go, well, then the question is, well, okay, do I continue to pursue this? Because were I to do so, I know that I would not be changing anybody's mind. A person or people that had an opposing view were not going to be convinced by whatever subsequent argument I were to make. But does that mean, do I then just stop posting things like that? Or do I just go ahead and keep poking the pig, so to speak? If you know what I mean, just, every now and again, just, make this statement, I mean, does that have, does even just making the statement, taking the time and taking the chance to go ahead and make the public statement, is that any more powerful than our silence?
First of all, I disagree with you. I don't think the most amoral wins. I mean, look what's happening in Ukraine, and I've been wearing a Ukraine necklace every day since the hostilities started last year, just to remind myself to keep Ukraine in the light, keep the people in the light. And so yeah, I don't know. What does anyone else think? No opinions.
I think sometimes it's true that the more immoral, the dirtier fighter wins, because they go where no one else will, but I don't think that's always the case. I don't think it's 100%, but it is quite often. And hi, Frederick, I remember you from, I'm the reason you're here.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Thank you.
Way back in the yonder years, Susanna and I were sharing a cubicle, I think around the time of the Iraq War.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And we were both of the same viewpoint that this was this was crap, what they were doing, bombing Iraq. And
right.
I also remember reading something, I think it was some Morristown paper, about someone who went there for peace. And I was like, wow, okay, that's great. Then I saw what a pummeling you were taking. And I went, well, yeah, there goes my cynicism again. And then I happened upon you at Montclair Friends meeting. I think you stood up and mentioned something at one point. And I was like, well, I like his viewpoint. So you're my Facebook friend. And Lois was looking for speakers. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I think Frederick might be good.
It's interesting that you're are you still a Methodist minister as well as being a Quaker?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah,
once ordained, always ordained.
Yeah,
they just send us out to pastor.
We had a Presbyterian minister who retired as a Presbyterian minister, and then he and his wife went to England and came back Quaker, and I never quite figured out how that happened. But he died a couple of years ago, but his widow is still very active in our meeting. And yeah, retired ministers are great. Great as Quakers, because you have a background. You've been thinking about things for a long time, which is really, really great.
And now that you're retired, you can say stuff that you probably couldn't before.
Well, yeah, because at this point I go in, I get called in for pulpit supply. So I go into churches that I am not responsible for administrating. And so I can go in and speak my truth. I tend to stay away. I don't really talk politics, from the pulpit. I don't think that's appropriate. But I do talk peace. I talk about the power of God over the power of people. In other words, I would not go into the pulpit and speak my word about who wins the war with regard to immorality. That is not something that I would say from the pulpit, because you're going to have different opinions about it, and that's fine. Susanna, I'm glad you disagree. I mean, I guess, that's perfectly fine.
I just see Russia as being incredibly amoral, and Ukraine is just trying to stop. So I suppose there's wars and wars. I mean, this is an invasion, this genocidal invasion, which is not like two
right.
Two nations just trying to blow each other.
I would just say that the Ukrainians are they're killing people as well. And they're defending themselves, and I understand that. And the victor of that particular conflict has yet to be determined. And what is true is that whoever comes out quote unquote victorious, that's not going to end the struggle. Because those resentments, I mean, whatever side it was, those resentments are there. It's it's a multi-headed dragon, violence and immorality, and you can chop off one head and it'll just grow another one. So
I am I'm British, and my English grandfather, lost 9 first cousins in the First World War. 9 first cousins in the First World War. So I have a very small family because everyone was killed. So I'm my great fear and regret about any war is just what will it's just the ripples go on. I mean, over 100 years after it's ended, I've just been invited to go to England in April for a launching of a book. about these young men that were killed in from a British school that all went off to the war, and they had something like 80 people from that school that was killed in the First World War, and so they're still talking about it.
Yeah.
You know, the First World War ended in 1918, and they're still talking about it. People are still suffering from it, and that's the problem with war. I mean, war is horrible. I mean, it's just awful. It's awful. But that's the problem they have in Ukraine. Do they just sort of not fight back and let people kill everyone, or do they fight back? And that's the problem we have as Quakers too. I mean, what do? Do you allow? Do you let the Russians come in with all their drones and drop bombs on you and destroy your electricity and blow up the nuclear, or do you figure out ways of stopping it? I'm very glad I'm not military, because I would just, I mean, I would do nothing. It's as simple as that. Stand still. I would not be taking up a gun or a sword or a drone or a weapon or anything. But how dare I tell anyone else not to do that?
Well, it would be taking it would be taking the example of Jesus. It would be taking the teaching of Gandhi, the teaching of MLK to a global level. So that, I mean, the Gandhi, it was the big massacre that got people's attention to say, well, you know what, this isn't the way that we want to go. It was the Pettit Bridge that made an invaluable change in that struggle. So yeah, the cost for global peace is going to be astronomical, because it means that one side is in fact going to do that. They're going to lay down their arms and be the example for the rest of the world to see the horror, and that then maybe there will be a change. But I mean, the size of that tragedy is beyond my comprehension, but I think that's what it's going to take. And I don't know if we can get there.
Well, if the massacre of Bucha and Mariupol didn't stop anything, and the massacre of 1,200 Israelis, that's the thing. It feels to me like the whole world is run by these weapons companies, the billionaires and the weapons companies. It's like, is that what this is all about? Yeah. Yeah. It's very depressing, actually. I find it I'm hoping I'm hoping we can have something uplifting coming out of it, but I don't really see it. It's just terribly upsetting what people do to other people, and that's awful. Yeah.
You know, I was really struck this evening by that saying that I will remember long, maybe forever. Don't just do something, stand there.
Right.
So absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
It really strikes me deeply.
I wonder if I can find that fellow's name. And I remember his first name was Grant.
Well, we had that on the notice board at Haddonfield meeting, except it was, don't just do something, sit.
Same idea, yeah.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
I will look up the fellow's name and pass it back to the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that I'm hopeful. Is hopeful the word? I don't know that hopeful is the word. I'm prayerful. I definitely am prayerful. That somehow God will intervene in some way. I mean, my study of the Bible and as best I can comprehend it on a holistic, taking it as a whole, is that I fear I think um, I it's going to, I'm sorry to say, but I think it's going to take something catastrophic to bring humankind back to zero. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Back to the place where we forget our bickerings back and forth, where you did this to me and I did that to you, and blah 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 blah, and on it goes. And that it's going to take something catastrophic to bring humankind to have the unity where maybe I mean does that mean I don't know what that means, but I mean um to get back to zero where we forget, you know we don't forget, but we forgive. Yeah,
Right.
Tom.
Well, I would say to that, there's always a slight glimmer of hope. After all, God brought us Gandhi, and God brought us Martin Luther King Jr. And when I think sometimes, because I'm old enough to have lived through the time of Martin Luther King Jr., and when I think sometimes of the state that the United States, as troubled as it is today, for example, but how it would be if it weren't for Martin Luther King Jr. and Bayard Rustin and the people he was associated with, it would have been just terrible. And it is infinitely better, I believe, because people like them were given to us. So for me, there's always a glimmer of hope. There are, miracles do happen. And they're perfect examples of that, to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
To me.
Yeah. Mm.
I'd like to ask if there are any final comments, because we usually end these things about an hour, and that's where we are right now.
I'd like to say thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of your circle this evening. I've enjoyed meeting you, and I thank you for being so attentive to my story. Um, 20 years ago, it's hard to believe. 20 years ago, but thank you so much for listening and for inviting me. It's a total pleasure to meet you.
We definitely owe thanks to Cynthia Newland, because she's the one who recommended you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
It's always good to talk to pacifists. It's good, especially hopeful pacifists, which is, let's hope. Let's hope our numbers increase. It's as simple as that.
And loving and accepting disagreement is always welcome.